So I'm going to get into some of the policies. These are a little bit less fun to talk about. Some of these actually only apply to some students in the room, so I'm just going to go through them. I just have a couple slides on these, and then I'm going to turn it over to our peer advisors for a few minutes. So one of the things I want to talk about is residency. Residency is a little bit different from being a California resident versus a non-resident. That's for fees and other stuff. We're talking about residency for your classes, residency for your degree here at UC Merced. And so what residency really is UC Merced wants to make sure that the degrees that UC Merced is granting are degrees for coursework completed at UC Merced. So UC Merced doesn't want to be the diploma mill for a study abroad program or the diploma mill for another university, whether it's a transfer institution or a university overseas. And so UC Merced is actually going to require that a certain number of courses be completed as a UC Merced student. So one of those things, this does not apply to EAP students, luckily, but it does apply to students over here for IOP programs. For senior residency, you need to complete 24 of your final 36 units as an undergraduate student here at UC Merced on campus or in EAP. So EAP is an automatic exception to this rule at this time. So EAP students, you guys are waived from this requirement. So if you complete all of your final 36 units abroad, you are still okay with this requirement. Now, the second requirement applies to all students. So anybody has a minor? Anybody have a minor in here? So there's quite a few minors in here. So if you have a minor here, you need to take at least 3 courses in that minor here on campus. You can take the rest abroad as long as your academic advisor and your school are okay with it, but you need to take 3 of those courses here on campus. You can't complete an entire minor in Spanish in Spain just because it looks like you have all the courses to do it and it sounds really exciting and you want a Spanish minor because all of a sudden you decided you have all these great courses to choose from. You still needed to take a couple courses in that Spanish minor here on campus. The next thing that I want to talk about is upper versus lower division. So this applies to EAP and IOP. If your coursework for IOP has been approved as lower division coursework, or if the coursework from EAP is approved as lower division coursework, it will not meet an upper division requirement. So if you have an upper division elective in your major that's required, that will not count. You will not be able to substitute a lower division course for an upper division requirement. EAP, what's nice about EAP is they have this My EAP course catalog, and you can take a look at the courses that other UC students have taken, and you can see which ones are lower division, those are 0 to 99, or 1 to 99, and which ones are upper division, 100 to 199. So you can take a look at that and see all that information online. You might be able to use an upper division course to substitute a lower division requirement, but you can't do it in the other direction. The next thing that I have is attendance policy. So every program is going to have some attendance policies, especially if you're doing a program that's run by the University of California, run by a study center, or a semester at sea will have very strict attendance policies. They might say you can have 2 unexcused absences or 3 unexcused absences, and sometimes the 4th one will drop you down a whole letter grade, or sometimes a 5th will actually make you fail a class. So pay attention, especially during orientation. They're going to talk about attendance policies. Other countries might have slightly more flexible attendance policies. But again, we are an academic program, and you guys are there to be taking classes. And if you do poorly because you don't show up for class, it will show up on your transcript. Especially if you're an EAP student, it will affect your UC Merced GPA because EAP is a UC program, and all of your grades are factored into your GPA, even if you took them abroad. The next thing is, this one's going to apply specifically to UC EAP and the coursework that you take. Some of you, a lot of students actually don't know a lot about taking classes pass, no pass versus for a letter grade. On our campus, not many students take advantage of those opportunities of taking a class for pass, no pass. But one of the requirements for EAP, and it's actually a UC-wide policy, but for your program with EAP, you need to take at least 2/3 of your classes for a letter grade. So no more than 1/3 of your classes, I should say classes, units, no more than 1/3 of your units for pass, no pass. All the rest have to be for a letter grade. Of course, you want a letter grade for those courses that count towards your major, and if you have a requirement that requires that a particular course be for a letter grade. We wouldn't want you to get caught and take a class for pass no pass, get a pass, and try to get it to substitute for a class that you need here, and find out that because you need a letter grade, you don't get it. For the intensive language program courses, those grades will be required to be taken as, those courses will be required to be taken for a letter grade. So you will need a letter grade for those courses. That goes, for the most part, for language and culture programs with few exceptions, but the language component of a language and culture program typically is required to be taken for a letter grade. And especially with EAP, you don't have many opportunities to retake a course. One of the problems about study abroad is great in a lot of ways, but one thing that's really difficult to do is because you usually only go abroad once, and even if you go abroad twice, sometimes you can't do the same program twice. You can't retake the exact same course abroad in order to have a retaken grade. So if you fail a class, you might not be able to get a retake, and so an F or a D or something like that on your transcript might stand permanently because you can't retake a course. Now, there are some special opportunities for students that I want to make sure that you guys are aware about. Most of the stuff I've been talking about in the last 2 slides has been a little bit more on the scary side or not so exciting side. But there are some great opportunities for students that I do want to point out for all of you, especially if you're doing an EAP program, but also for others. First is internships. If you are doing a program and an internship is either built into your program or an internship is an opportunity for your program, you might actually be able to get academic credit for that internship, especially if you work with your study center, with your liaison at your host university. And so if you work with them, you might be able to set up maybe some special study units and get 4 semester units or so of special study credit to be able to do an internship during a semester. Or you might be able to tack on a no-credit internship onto the end of your program. You might be able to do special study. Maybe that's with a local professor on site. Or maybe you have a requirement that you need to fulfill from UC Merced while you're abroad. So you might work with a UC Merced professor, but we can still put it onto your EAP transcript so that you can still continue with an independent study from a UC Merced anthropology professor here, but still be abroad and take the rest of your courses at a host university. That's very possible. And then there are a lot of, this overlaps quite a bit with independent research projects, but you might also have some opportunities in some countries, in Asia in particular, East Asia, you might have some opportunities to do some research projects if you connect with faculty, and so you might be able to work in a bio-research lab or something like that. And some programs actually have some research components built right into the programs. Australia might also be a great place to find some lab coursework. So the next slide is actually going to be presented by our peer advisors, and I'm going to have them come down, and they're going to come down as a group of 4, and hopefully you guys have all run into these 4 peer advisors at one point coming into our office and asking questions. And here they're going to give you a little bit more information that might be a little bit more fun than what I just talked about. Okay, you guys need some time to set up? Okay, okay. So, up. And hopefully you guys have a chance to some of the students around you, because a lot of you are doing programs at least in the same region, if not the same program as the students around you or in the same row as you. But we want to take a little time, since we have a little time to do some setup over here. Does anybody have any questions about some of the content that we've covered so far? We still have more content to cover, but any questions about what I've discussed, what John's discussed, or what Rebecca has discussed? Any questions out there, even from parents? Yes, way in the back. Well, we need a what? It's the a global phone. Cell phones. Okay, well, this is a good question, especially for your country-specific orientations. Okay. You won't necessarily need to have one, but stay tuned. Talisa's going to talk a little bit more about some some other topics towards the end of the presentation. But also, that's a really good question for especially student returnees who've done your particular program. So they might be able to give you some country-specific advice, even talk about what their friends on the same program have already done. Other questions while they set up? Yes. Actually, after the peer advisors do their presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about financial aid. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about financial aid as soon as they're finished with their slides. Other questions? Yes. Sweden power adapters. Okay, so power adapters is actually a really good question in general. Regions will have different power adapters. Most of Europe will actually use the same adapters unless you're in the UK. But this is a good question also for your country-specific orientation. Sweden and most of the rest of continental Europe will actually use a two-prong adapter. It's kind of a little bit wider than ours. Most of Latin America will actually use the same plug that the United States uses. The UK and Ireland, I think, will have their own plug, as well as Asia having different plugs as well. But this is a really good question to go over with your, either in your country-specific orientation or to talk to a returnee. But you can also find an adapter set if you go to a place like Radio Shack or a travel store. You can get a whole kit of adapters. Are you guys ready? Okay.